It didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a moment carved into time. A storm where every choice echoed louder than the last. Infinity War didn't build to a victory, it built to a void. A void we didn't see coming until it swallowed everything. And for the first time in years, a superhero film ended in silence. We watched them fall, not in fire, but in failure. Not from weakness, but from inevitability. There were no last-minute saves, no tricks, no rewinds, just dust and disbelief. A villain who didn't gloat, but walked away. A hero who didn't win, but wept. And an audience left holding its breath. There was something sacred in that loss. Something rare in its honesty. The universe felt real because it bled. It cracked at the seams and didn't pretend to mend. It let us sit with sorrow, with helplessness, with the truth that not all battles are won with strength alone. Then came the shift. The bright lights, the multiverse, the endless jokes and weightless worlds. What once felt like myth now feels like noise. What once meant everything now means less. Because if no sacrifice is final, then no moment is sacred. And if no one stays gone, then nothing feels earned. We still search for that feeling, that stillness after the snap, that hush in the theater, that pain that meant the story mattered. We search for it in every new release, hoping to taste that fire again, hoping something will echo as deeply as it did when the screen turned to dust and the credits rolled without mercy. It wasn't just the story that changed us. It was the way it trusted us to feel, to sit in the wreckage without relief, to mourn with the characters instead of being rushed to the next punchline. It didn't beg for approval, it demanded presence. And that presence lingered long after the screen went dark. In this video, we're returning to the last time Marvel dared to let the villain win. The last time the stakes felt permanent and the pain felt earned. We'll revisit what made Infinity War more than a film, why everything after it has struggled to hold the same weight, and what it truly means when we say, this was the last great Marvel movie. Infinity War arrived like a prophecy fulfilled. A storm gathered across 10 years of stories, of glances, of losses and promises. It wasn't just a movie, it was a reckoning. A collision of worlds, of ideologies, of destinies clashing in silence and fury. And somehow, it made the impossible feel inevitable. We watched heroes fall, not just in battle, but in belief. Thor questioned his worth. Tony feared the future. Wanda hesitated and shattered. Strange stared through timelines and still doubted the outcome. Each scene felt woven from threads we'd been following for years. Each moment mattered. The tone was darker, sharper, truer. The colors drained just enough to feel real, not grim. The pacing pulsed like a heartbeat before a fight. There were no winks to the camera, no safety nets in sight. The characters weren't untouchable, they were trembling, and the audience felt it. Even Thanos wasn't just a villain. He was conviction dressed in calm. A monster with a philosophy. A god with grief in his eyes. He didn't boast, he believed. And in believing, he broke everything. He forced us to see the heroes, not as legends, but as people. And in doing so, made them more than ever before. Infinity War didn't promise victory, it promised truth. The truth that sometimes the good guys lose. The truth that sacrifice is messy. The truth that heroes fail. And in that failure, they become unforgettable. Then came the aftermath, and something cracked. Not in the universe, but in the foundation. Marvel had reached the peak and didn't know where to climb next. It looked down at what it built and smiled too long. And in that pause, something slipped. Endgame was massive, no doubt. But massive isn't the same as meaningful. It wrapped threads, yes, but not with fire with formula. We lost stakes and gained spectacle. We lost fear and gained fan service. The world ended and still felt safe. The tension was gone, replaced with nostalgia. The grief was quieted by cameos. The battles were big, but hollow. We cheered, yes, but not from the gut. Not from that place where stories live forever. We clapped because we remembered, not because we believed. Then came the new wave. Phase 4, full of promise, but somehow less urgent. The multiverse bloomed, but the emotions withered. Power levels rose, but purpose faded. Scenes grew longer, but arcs felt shorter. And every win felt weightless. We weren't tired of heroes. We were tired of pretending the stakes were still real. Tired of pretending loss meant something when resurrection was always an episode away. Tired of being told this was the next big thing, when all we saw was a slow unraveling. There's a sadness in watching something you love start to forget itself. Like watching an old friend smile through something they no longer feel. Marvel used to be about humanity wrapped in fantasy. Now it feels like fantasy wrapped in content. We lost that breathless silence, that pause after a sacrifice, that ache in the chest when a hero chose death over survival. Now we get bright colors and cosmic resets, but no grief, no weight, no mourning that lingers in the quiet. The moments that should have broken us barely moved us. Natasha's death felt rushed. T'Challa's absence was handled with reverence, yet the film around it struggled to carry his spirit. Jane returned and vanished in flashes. Strange explored the multiverse, but left no echo. There were tears, but they dried too fast. There were losses, but they reset too quick. There were battles, but no scars left behind. And so we watched from a distance, remembering what it felt like to care deeply, wondering when we stopped feeling it. Because it's not the visuals we miss, it's the soul. It's the gravity of knowing someone might not come back. It's the story that makes you sit in silence after the credits roll, and ask yourself what it all meant. But Infinity War, that still stuns, that still roars, that still stands like a monument in modern cinema. A mosaic of loss, of courage, of chaos in harmony. It wasn't perfect, but it was powerful, because it dared to do what few blockbusters do it, let the villain win. It was the silence that followed the snap, the ash floating through fingers, the wide eyes, the empty words, that told us this wasn't just another chapter. This was the wound, the raw opening, the cliff with no ladder, Thor's scream, Peter's plea, Wanda's destruction, Steve's broken whisper. They didn't need explanation. They needed nothing more than stillness, because that stillness said everything, and we felt it. But maybe, just maybe, that greatness isn't gone. Maybe it's buried beneath the noise, waiting for someone to dig deeper, to remember that audiences don't crave spectacle, they crave substance, they crave connection. There are still stories to tell, still characters who ache, still corners of this universe that can be honest, raw, unforgettable. The blueprint is there, it's always been there. All it takes is one spark to light the fire again, and bring back the weight of wonder. The next great Marvel moment doesn't need a portal scene. It needs a heartbeat, a choice that shatters, a look that lingers, a villain who wins not with power, but with purpose, a hero who loses everything and still stands. It can happen, it should happen, it must happen, because the audience hasn't left, they've just gone quiet. They're still watching, still waiting, still hoping that the next film will hit like it used to, like Infinity War did. And maybe that's the truest legacy of Infinity War. Not just what it was, but what it reminds us we still want. Stories with bite, with silence, with stakes that stay. But if this was the peak, if this was the moment Marvel stood tallest, then everything since has felt like a long echo, a beautiful echo, yes, but fading, distant, hollow. We remember the way it felt to lose, to truly lose, to sit in the dark, staring at a screen, wondering how the world could keep turning, wondering if the heroes could come back from this, wondering if we could. Infinity War didn't just change the MCU, it changed the audience. It raised the bar, not just for what we see, but for what we feel. And when you feel that deep once, it's hard to accept anything less. It's hard to settle for surface when you've tasted soul. So maybe Marvel didn't fall. Maybe it just drifted. Into comfort, into formula, into safety. And in doing so, it left behind what made it matter. It left behind the storm, the silence, the weight. Infinity War was the last great Marvel movie. Not because it ended with death, but because it lived. It lived in fear, in choice, in loss, in stillness. And until Marvel finds that again, everything else will feel like an echo.